All right, so in this video, we're going to learn two things about Vite. Vite is or Vite, looking at you, the Primogen, is a front-end build tool, basically. And what's really great about it is it's got a really nice dev server with hot module reloading. I've been using it for about a year and a half, 2 years, I would say. And the default configuration for it are great, but sometimes you're going to have to go in there and change the configuration for whatever reason. And I've got a really good reason today to do that. But first, let me just highlight the two things you're going to be learning in this video and the things I've just learned. And I don't want to forget, so I'm making this video. So if we go to the config section here, in configuring Vite, there's two things we're interested in. Conditional configuration, right? So how to set different configurations, whether we're building for production or if we're building for development or using the dev server. The other thing that we're going to be looking at is the resolve, if I can find it, alias. There we go. The resolve alias, which is a way to basically tell Vite to use a certain build artifact when looking at a namespace. So if you're using a JavaScript or TypeScript, and you're using NPM packages, for instance. So when you do import something from package name, right? Well, there's a default file or build artifact in that package, NPM package, that Vite will look to automatically. But sometimes you might want to point to something different, and this is what we're going to be doing in the next few minutes. First, a little bit of context. I've been working on a game for fun as part of a game jam called JS13K, and it's a web-based game jam, so everybody's doing it in JavaScript, HTML that needs to run on the web, in the browser. And one of the interesting constraints of that game jam is that the build artifact that you submit to the game jam gods has to be 13 kilobytes or less zipped. That is quite small. So people are finding clever ways to reduce the size of their bundle, their build artifact. They usually minify their code. They compress it, obviously. They allow you to zip it. And anything we can do, right, to just make it as small as possible. So that's been a concern of mine, which led me to an interesting discovery. So if we're looking at that little game engine, little JS here, we can see from the documentation that we should be able to get about a 7K zipped footprint, if you will, of just a vanilla starter project build with the engine. So basically the engine and a thin wrapper around it for your own code. And that's been my experience. That's about what I get. But here's the interesting thing. You see from the documentation here that there's different build files that the engine provides for you, right? I'm interested in the ESM ones because I'm using import statements, modules, whether you're doing it in JavaScript or TypeScript. That's what you'll probably want to be using, and that's what I use. And the difference between the two is that you've got the little JS ESM.js, which is a module with debug mode available. So I haven't really looked into what that means, but I can guess that there's some special debug code that's added in there for a debug mode in the game engine. Some maybe console logs, some asserts, things like that, right? And then you've got the release mode, Minified version. So this one's not Minified. On top of having all that extra kind of debug-related code, it's also not minified. It's human readable, it's got comments, and the whole thing, right? This one is minified and also has all of the debug stuff removed, so it should be significantly smaller. So obviously, when we're actually building the artifact we're going to be submitting to the game jam authorities, we would rather use this version than the other one. We want this one for development because it's got that nice debug stuff in there, but the other one for when we're building for production. How do you do that with Vite? I had never really had to do that before, so I did a bit of research, some digging, some experimenting, and here's how you do it. So if we're looking at my code here, actually, first of all, let's go to our NPM package, the node modules, Node.js engine. Let me bump that up a little bit for you guys. All right, folks, you should be able to see this now. Okay, so Node.js engine, and let's look at the package.json here. So we can see that there's a main property, and it's pointing to the dist folder, littlejs.esm.js. Right? And if we look at the dist folder, it's got all these build artifacts that the documentation was talking about. So the main one, the usual one that build tools will use when they're looking at the packages package.json file is this one. By default, that's what's going to be used. All right? And that's great when we're doing development, when I'm working on the game. But then when I want to build it, I would rather use something else. And as you can see, there's nothing pointing to that particularly in this file. So how do we do it? So we need to include in our project a vite.config file. You might have one, you might not. Honestly, the default configurations settings are really good with Vite. So it's quite possible that you've been using it without even bothering with a file like that. But in our case, we need one. And I think you can do it with a vite.config.js, .ts, or even .json. Though if you do JSON, it's going to be different than what I'm showing you here. So if you want to do conditional configuration, it's easier to do it in a JS or TS file. Since I'm in a TS project, I've used a TS file. It's really nice because you get typing along with it. So it's a nice little perk. So what you want to do is use the define config function from Vite, from the Vite package. And this expects a function as a parameter. So you pass in a function. That function returns a user config object. And that's what Vite reads and uses to override its own internal defaults. These we won't spend much time talking about. They're just advanced configuration to make the minification even stronger, right? And at the moment, what I've done is I've left those configurations for any mode, whether we're in production, whether we're in development, they're on, because I wanted to see the difference it would make to switch between the min and the non-min package of little.js without the difference these things might make. Okay, but in reality, I'm going to be using these only in my build, my production build, I believe, and leave the Vite defaults for development. All right, so what we're looking at here, so that was, how to do conditional configuration, right? You've got the mode here that you're taking in as a parameter to your callback. And then you can use that, for instance, as I am here, by saying, hey, if the mode is production, I want you to, change these things about the configuration. The one thing that we're going to change for production is the resolve alias for little.js engine. So what this means is that when in your code, or in my code in this case, we're doing something like import some class from little.js engine, well, now Vite is going to look at this here as the thing to point to. Like it's going to be looking at this code instead of the default that was set in the package.json for the little.js engine, right? So let's see how this makes a difference and confirm that this actually works. I'm going to comment that out. So now Vite is going to be using the main default one, which is the debug version, which should be bigger. So let me clear this up first. And let's do this. All right, so we can see that we're taking 7.21 kilobytes gzip. Right, that's what we're interested in. That's the JS bundle file for our build. Now, if I am to uncomment this, and now we're telling Vite, when you see little JS engine imports, use the Minified version of the package. And now let's rebuild and see the difference. 14.76, right? The other one was 17.21. So quite a difference, really. I'm still over the 13K that I need to be under, but that's fine. I know there's things I can do with my own code that is probably going to be okay. But interesting, right? That's an interesting thing that we can do with Vite. It was quite easy to do, actually, too, once I figured out how to do it by reading the documentation. So 2 things we just learned, 2 features from Vite related to configuration, how to configure differently based on the mode, or so production or development, and how to use resolve aliases to point the compiler, the build tool, to a different build artifacts for different NPM packages. This would work. We've only used it for little JS engine, but this would work with any potential NPM package that might have different build artifacts. So there you have it. I hope this was helpful. See you in the next one.